Imagine this. You're sitting in a quiet room. The walls are blank, the light is soft, and no one else is there. You close your eyes for a moment, and suddenly a voice, not external, but unmistakably yours, whispers a single sentence into the silence: "You're not good enough." Instantly, something shifts inside you. You feel smaller, heavier. The room is no longer a sanctuary, it's a cell. You open your eyes, and though the room hasn't changed, everything feels different. The air is thicker, the walls closer. You hesitate to move, as if the world outside this room has grown colder, more dangerous. But what really happened? No one entered, no violence occurred, nothing touched you, only a string of words, and yet it altered your entire reality. Now imagine a different sentence whispered by the same voice: "You are capable of anything." The shift returns, this time electric, expansive. The room feels lighter, your breath deepens, possibility hums in the air. And again, nothing in the physical world has changed, only the words. Why does a simple phrase, a few sounds strung together, have the power to paralyze you or liberate you? Why can one sentence echo in your mind for years, while another slips away like smoke? What sorcery is this? That language alone can bend the world inside your skull. We are taught to think of words as tools, passive vessels that carry our thoughts. But what if they're not passive? What if they're active agents? Not something you use, but something that uses you. What if every time you speak, out loud or silently, you are casting spells? The word spell, after all, has a curious double meaning: to spell a word and to cast a spell. Coincidence or forgotten truth? Philosophers like Ludwig Wittgenstein warned us, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." But how often do we consider this in daily life? When you say, "I can't do this," are you simply describing reality? Or are you creating it? Consider, if you never had the word freedom, could you ever truly conceive of it? If a culture never developed the word depression, would people in that culture experience it the same way? What if the words you were given as a child, lazy, weird, too much, became the architecture of your self-image? Not reflections of who you were, but the mold you were forced to grow into. How many of your thoughts are yours, and how many were planted by parents, schools, media, religion, through language? Carl Jung once wrote that, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Now ask yourself, how much of your unconscious is built from words you never questioned? You see, language is not just a mirror, it's a blueprint. It builds the walls of your reality, brick by brick, belief by belief. And the most dangerous prisons are not the ones made of iron, but of language. Because when you're trapped inside a story you didn't write, you won't even know you're a prisoner. You'll think this is just who you are. You'll call it personality, identity, even destiny. But really, it's a script written by others, enforced by repetition, and spoken so many times that it feels like truth. Words can do more than shape perception. They govern it. What you call fear could just as easily be excitement in disguise, if someone had only given you the vocabulary to name it that way. What you call failure could have been called feedback and changed the course of your life. Isn't it strange that a shift in language can shift your entire emotional experience? If that's true, then are your emotions even yours? Or are they echoes of the words you've absorbed? So here's the question that burns beneath it all. Are you living a life of your own making, or are you just following the script that language wrote for you? We rarely question the words we think with, but if language is the medium of thought, then he who controls your language controls your mind. And if your mind is your reality, then what does that say about the power of a single word? A whisper can feel like a scream. A compliment can change a decade. A name can become a prophecy. So what happens when the words you carry aren't just tools, but chains? Or worse, when they feel like your own thoughts? What if the voice in your head isn't really yours at all? What if it never was? What if the greatest manipulation in your life didn't come from a tyrant or a government or an algorithm, but from your own inner monologue? Not because you're broken, but because the very language you think with was never neutral. It came to you preloaded, with bias, with emotion, with assumptions about the world, about morality, about yourself. You inherited a vocabulary long before you had the ability to question it. And through that vocabulary, you learned to frame your experiences. But here's the hidden problem. Language doesn't just describe reality, It filters it. Imagine a child who scrapes their knee. A parent tells them, "Don't cry, be strong." The child internalizes this phrase. Crying becomes weakness. Emotion becomes danger. Vulnerability becomes shame. Now imagine that child grows up. They feel sadness, loss, fear, but the language they've been given says those feelings are not strong. So they suppress, they detach, they smile when they want to scream, and they have no idea why. Carl Jung called this the repression of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we are taught to deny, disown, and exile. But how do we repress? Through words. I'm fine. I don't care. It doesn't matter. Every one of these is a linguistic mask, a way to avoid the raw, wordless truth underneath. But words aren't just shields. They're mirrors, and the more you lie to that mirror, the more distorted the reflection becomes. Here's where the philosophical roots deepen. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of the tyranny of language, that we mistake words for truth, symbols for substance. In On Truth and Lies in a Non-Moral Sense, he argued that language is nothing more than a mobile army of metaphors. We forget that words are just representations, illusions we agreed upon, and when we believe in them too literally, they enslave us. To say, "I am a failure," is not a fact. It is a metaphor you have mistaken for truth. To say, "This is impossible," is not reality. It is a story framed by your inherited vocabulary. Arthur Schopenhauer saw language as a veil over the will, a mask we wear over the raw, blind force of life itself. We speak in order to make the chaos make sense, but in doing so, we often oversimplify. We reduce the richness of existence into black and white labels. Good, bad, right/wrong, success/failure. But real life doesn't move in binaries. It pulses in gradients, in shades of grey, in paradoxes that defy quick definitions. And yet, our language demands clarity. It forces conclusions. It makes us say things we don't fully believe, just to be understood. This is where Aldous Huxley's warning becomes prophetic. In Brave New World, it wasn't physical chains that enslaved society. It was comfort, distraction, and most of all, language. The people weren't beaten into submission. They were conditioned through slogans, through repetition, through a carefully curated lexicon that made certain thoughts literally unthinkable. Community, identity, stability. That was the mantra. And once it was burned into the minds of the population, rebellion didn't require a prison. It required a dictionary, one without the word freedom. Now, turn inward. How many of your personal mantras were given to you, not chosen? Think of the phrases you live by. Time is money. Life is hard. Don't get your hopes up. It is what it is. People don't change. This is just the way I am. These are not truths. These are incantations, mantras of limitation, passed down through families, cultures, institutions. And like spells, the more they're repeated, the more real they become. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that man is condemned to be free, that we are the authors of our own meaning. But language tries to take that authorship away. It gives us pre-written scripts, and most of us accept them without question. The moment a child is labeled difficult, they begin to behave that way. Call someone ugly often enough, and they will stop looking you in the eye. Tell yourself, "I'm not the kind of person who can change," and you won't. It's not that the label reflects reality, the label creates it. This is the psychology of self-fulfilling prophecy. This is the mechanism of confirmation bias, the brain's tendency to seek evidence that matches its beliefs. And beliefs are made of what? Words. Think of the placebo effect. A sugar pill can relieve pain simply because someone was told it would. Belief alone alters biology, but belief cannot exist without language to name it. So here lies the invisible structure behind your every decision, every doubt, every dream, the words in your head. The problem isn't just that language filters your reality. The deeper problem is that the filters are invisible. You don't question them because you think with them. You believe you are seeing the world clearly, when really you're seeing it through a stained glass window, colored by childhood, culture, trauma, and repetition. And the most dangerous part? You think it's truth. You think you're too old, too late, too broken, not because of facts, but because of phrases. You think success looks a certain way, love feels a certain way, life must unfold a certain way, because those were the stories you were told, using words you never questioned. But what if you could? What if language is not a mirror or a prison, but a tool you can reshape? If your thoughts are coded in words, then to change your thinking, you must change the code, not just with affirmations or slogans, but with awareness, to watch your words like a hawk, to interrogate the phrases you inherited, to notice which ones shrink you and which ones awaken you. Because only when you see the prison walls can you begin to tear them down. But before we can talk about liberation, we must understand the full extent of our captivity. What happens when we live for years, decades, inside a reality crafted by false language? What happens when a society builds its values on words it never defined? What are the unseen consequences of never questioning the words that build our world? You don't notice the temperature of the water you were born into until it starts to burn you. And by the time it does, it's too late. That's what it means to live inside a linguistic illusion. To walk through life believing your thoughts are yours, your emotions are pure, your beliefs are rational, when in fact they are echoes of old language, unconscious scripts, ancient wounds recycled into modern words. So what happens when we don't question this language? The answer is subtle, devastating, and everywhere. Let's begin with the self. You believe you are a self-contained individual, a person with a name, a past, a personality. But all of that, yes, all of it, is built from words. Your name is a word. Your identity is a story, crafted from phrases repeated over years. I'm the smart one. I'm bad at relationships. I'm anxious. I've always been this way. These are not truths. They are narratives. Narratives so deeply embedded that they pass for fact. But here's the consequence. When the story becomes too tight, you stop growing. Language becomes a cage, and anything that doesn't fit the script gets discarded. This is called cognitive dissonance, the discomfort we feel when reality challenges our internal narrative. Most people don't rewrite the story. They deny the reality. A child called gifted begins to fear failure. A teenager labeled shy avoids risk. An adult branded broken lowers their expectations. In psychological terms, we call this identity foreclosure, when a person commits too early to an identity they didn't choose. And language is the gatekeeper, but it doesn't stop at the personal level. The consequences ripple outward. In relationships, how often do we argue not over what happened, but over what words mean? She disrespected me. He manipulated me. This is love. That was abuse. Each word carries weight, moral weight, emotional weight. And when we define our reality through emotionally charged language, we stop seeing the event itself and start reacting to the label. It's not the action that destroys trust. It's the word we attach to it. A glance becomes judgment. A mistake becomes betrayal. A silence becomes abandonment. When we don't realize how language filters meaning, we become victims of our own interpretation. Now zoom out. What about society? Language doesn't just shape individuals. It builds empires. Empires of ideology, of marketing, of control. Think of political language. Freedom fighter versus terrorist. Collateral damage versus civilian deaths. War on drugs. Peacekeeping force. Alternative facts. Do you see how words cloak reality in palatable lies? George Orwell understood this well in 1984, where the Ministry of Truth rewrote language itself. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. But Orwell's dystopia was not a warning of what might come. It was a mirror of what already was, and still is. Every society builds its values on words, but what if those words are empty? What happens when we mistake branding for belief? We say justice, but mean vengeance. We say love, but mean possession. We say success, but mean burnout, addiction, loneliness, and debt, wrapped in polished photos and corporate slogans. This is the linguistic hijacking of meaning, and we suffer for it. Think of mental health. Do you realize how many people walk into therapy not to explore themselves, but to match a diagnosis? Because they need a word, a label, something to explain the pain. And once they have it, anxiety, OCD, depression, ADHD, it becomes their identity. This isn't to dismiss diagnosis, but what if we mistook the map for the territory? What if the label becomes a life sentence? Language can bring clarity, but it can also reduce the infinite to the clinical. You are no longer a human being moving through a storm of emotion. You are a case. You are not lonely, overwhelmed, lost in existential confusion. You are mentally ill, and then you live as such. Now let's go deeper. The brain itself. Neuroscience shows us that language literally shapes perception. In studies, people who have more words for colors can distinguish more shades. Cultures with no word for left or right use cardinal directions and have extraordinary spatial orientation. People who speak in futureless languages, where there's no separate word for future tense, save more money because they see the future as more immediate. Do you see what this means? Your vocabulary doesn't just describe your world, it constructs it. Without words for hope, you cannot hope. Without words for peace, you cannot find it. Without words for freedom, you cannot fight for it. And the most tragic consequence? When someone hands you a word, especially in moments of vulnerability, you inhabit it. They say, "You're worthless," and it becomes prophecy. They say, "This is all you'll ever be," and it becomes architecture. Not because it's true, but because your brain doesn't know the difference between internal and external dialogue. It just absorbs language and builds reality from it. This is how entire generations can be shaped by propaganda, how cultures can normalize oppression, how families can pass down trauma without ever saying a word louder than a whisper. Because it's not just what is said, it's what goes unchallenged. Every unexamined phrase becomes a brick in the wall of your mental prison. So ask yourself, what words have you accepted without permission? What stories have you repeated so many times that they now feel like laws of nature? And what might happen if you began to question them? What might happen if you began to rewrite them? Because if words can bind reality, then they can unravel it. And if the cage is made of language, then the key must be too. But to find it, you must rebel. Not against people, not against society, but against the words in your own mind. You've lived inside a cage built from invisible ink, and now you see the bars. The words that once felt harmless, casual, ordinary, now shimmer with their true weight. They are not reflections, they are instructions. They do not describe reality, they create it. But here's the revolutionary idea. If words can shape your reality, then you can shape your words. This is the first act of rebellion. Become the author of your language, not the passive receiver, not the silent echo, but the conscious creator. Begin where it hurts the most, your inner voice, that relentless narrator who speaks in absolutes. I always mess things up. No one will ever love me. I'm not the kind of person who succeeds. Who gave you those words? Did you choose them, or did they sneak in through the voice of a parent, a teacher, a bully, a lover, a culture that profits from your doubt? And if they were given to you, are you obligated to keep them? No, you can write new ones. Not false affirmations, not shallow slogans, but truer stories. Stories that allow you to grow, to breathe, to become. Because becoming begins with language. When Carl Jung spoke of integrating the shadow, he didn't mean curing yourself of darkness. He meant naming it, giving it words. Because what we cannot name, we cannot face. And what we refuse to face controls us from the dark. Jung understood that true freedom begins when we reclaim the forbidden words: anger, envy, lust, fear, weakness, sadness, not to shame them, not to pretend they're noble, but to accept them as part of the whole. Shadow work is linguistic liberation. It is looking at the terrifying voices within and saying, I hear you, and I am still whole. So what is the rebellion? It begins in small, radical acts of language. Start with reframing. This is not toxic positivity, it's linguistic sovereignty. Not, I failed again, but I experimented. And this time, the outcome taught me something. Not, I'm anxious, but I'm experiencing energy that hasn't found direction yet. Not, I'm broken, but I carry wounds, and I'm learning how to walk with them. This isn't about lying to yourself. It's about telling better truths. Truths that allow movement, healing, choice. The even Nietzsche, often misread as a cynic, believed in the power of redefinition. He wrote, "Become who you are." But how can you become who you are if you are trapped in someone else's language? Rebellion means reclaiming meaning. It means looking at words like success, love, purpose, truth, and asking, what do these mean to me? Who taught me that definition? And does it still serve me? This is the deconstruction of inherited language, the unlearning of scripts passed down like heirlooms no one asked for. You are not obligated to carry your family's vocabulary. You are not required to keep using your culture's idea of worth. You are allowed, no, destined, to redesign the language of your life. Here's how. 1. Name the old spells. Every limiting belief you carry has a phrase behind it. Find it. Write it down. Look at it. I'm not creative. I'm too old. I can't change. I'm not lovable. Hold it in the light. See it as a spell, a linguistic program installed without your consent. Challenge it. Ask, who gave this to me? When? Why? And most importantly, is it true now? 2. Replace with true language, not fantasy, not wishful thinking. True language. Language that leaves room for growth. I'm discovering my creativity. I've lived long enough to try something new. Change is difficult, but I've changed before. I'm learning how to love myself even as I struggle. These phrases are doors, not walls. 3. Speak the language of becoming. We often speak as if we're finished products. I am this, I am that, but you are not a statue. You are a river. Speak in process. I'm learning, I'm healing, I'm becoming. I'm rewriting this part of my life. This is language that moves. 4. Guard your vocabulary like sacred ground. Be ruthless with your internal monologue. If you wouldn't speak to a friend that way, don't speak to yourself that way. If a word feels like poison, trace its origin and purge it. Your mind is a cathedral. Words are the stained glass. Don't let graffiti define the light. 5. Create your own lexicon. Start inventing your own phrases. Instead of working out, call it building vitality. Instead of failure, call it fieldwork. Instead of problems, call them portals. This isn't semantics, it's psychology. The brain responds to meaning, and meaning is born in language. By reshaping your vocabulary, you're reshaping your nervous system's reaction to life. 6. Reclaim the power of silence. Sometimes, rebellion means saying nothing, to sit with discomfort without naming it, to experience life without reducing it to words, because some truths are too deep for language, and that's okay. Silence is not emptiness. It is a return, a reset, a reminder that you are not your words. You are the source of them. When you begin to live this way, consciously, linguistically awake, everything changes. You stop believing every thought. You stop speaking from old pain. You begin to notice the subtle violence in passive phrases. You begin to speak from choice instead of habit. And then you begin to write your own myth, not the one handed to you, not the one that kept you small, but the one that calls you to rise. Because you are not a character in someone else's story. You are the storyteller, and words are your weapons, your brushstrokes, your compass. So ask yourself, what will you create now that you hold the pen? There's a moment that arrives quietly, often in the spaces between words. It does not announce itself with lightning or revelation. It comes when the noise stops, when the last borrowed phrase dissolves, when the scripts have burned away and the mirror no longer lies. It's the moment you realize you are not the voice in your head, you are the one listening to it. The final truth is not a new phrase, slogan, or belief. It's not something you can speak. It's the realization that you never needed to be defined at all, because language is power, but it's also limitation. Every word names something, and by naming it, it separates it from everything else. You are not separate. You are not a noun. You are not a label. You are not even a self in the way language has led you to believe. You are experience, motion, awareness. You are the space in which all words appear and disappear. This is what the mystics meant when they spoke of awakening. This is what the philosophers hinted at when they broke language down to rubble. Wittgenstein once wrote, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent." He wasn't giving up. He was pointing to the edge of thought, the place where language ends and truth begins. There is a silence underneath your thoughts, a stillness beneath the monologue. And when you fall into that stillness, you see, the words were never you. They were clouds. You are the sky. You are not broken. You were only described that way. You are not a failure. You were only named that once and believed it. Words made you think you were a thing, a story, a condition, but you were always something deeper. The ancient Taoists knew this. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. They warned us. The moment you name something, you lose its essence. But in the West, we did the opposite. We named everything and lost ourselves in the definitions. And so we live in exile, not from home, but from ourselves. You see it now, don't you? The child who was told, "You're not enough," and carried it like a prophecy. The teenager who learned that love meant control. The adult who says, "I'm just tired," but means, "I no longer remember who I am." This is not your fault. It is the inheritance of every generation that was taught to speak before it was taught to feel. We have built our world on words, on economics, on politics, on algorithms of desire. But the soul doesn't speak in syllables. It speaks in presence. So what do you do now? You return. Not back to an old identity, not back to silence out of fear, but back to the place before the words. The place where you are not good or bad, worthy or unworthy. The place where you are pure, unnameable, alive. And from that place, you begin to speak again. But this time, not to define yourself, not to control others, not to perform an identity. You speak to connect, to express the inexpressible, to offer a bridge between your inner world and another's. That is the true power of language, not as a tool of control, but as a vessel for compassion. When Gabor Mate speaks of trauma, he doesn't just diagnose. He listens. He reflects. He names pain not to trap people in it, but to free them from shame. That is sacred language, healing language. When Dostoevsky wrote of suffering, he didn't simplify it. He dove into its contradictions, its madness. That is courageous language. When Nietzsche spoke of becoming, he wasn't offering a self-help path. He was pointing toward the chaos we must embrace to grow. That is transformative language. And now, it's your turn. Speak the truth, but let it come from presence, not programming. Let your words be alive, unpolished, real. Speak as though the world is listening for something true, not something impressive. Say, I don't know. I'm scared. I'm learning. I feel something I can't name. I'm changing. I want to live with more meaning. Let that be your new language, a language of becoming. Because here's the secret they never taught you. You were never meant to fit into words. You were meant to transcend them. And once you know this, truly know this, you become untouchable in the most beautiful way. Words may still visit, thoughts may still swirl, but they are no longer dictators. They are passing weather in the sky of your awareness. You no longer need to believe everything you think. You no longer need to accept every label, every opinion, every story that arrives in your mind. You are the silence beneath the story. You are the author who forgot she was holding the pen, and now you remember. So write something new, not perfect, not poetic, just real. Because language may have caged you, but awareness will set you free. And that freedom begins now, in the space between this sentence and the next thought you choose to believe.